Welcome back again, and once again, I'm Hyacinth, and today, we will discuss theories and hypotheses in the field of ELL. So let's go. Acquisition learning hypothesis: people learn to speak in two different ways. Acquired system, subconsciously similar to the natural way. Learned system, formal instruction. Affective filter hypothesis lists the different variables that facilitate the role in L2 acquisition. The more stress a learner has, the harder it is for them to learn. The variables are motivation, anxiety, self-confidence. Behaviorism theory dominated both psychology and linguistics in the 1950s. This theory suggests that external stimuli, extrinsic, can elicit an internal response, which in turn can elicit an internal stimuli, intrinsic, that lead to external responses. Case theory, the study of thematic roles or grammatical case in languages of the world. Cognitive theory, the cognitive theory, is the exact opposite of behaviorism. The cognitive approach differs because those that believe in cognitive or thinking theories believe that a person's mind is actually responding to learning and is not an automatic, almost biological, instinctual response. Comprehensible input theory contends that more comprehensible input results in more acquisition. The Creole hypothesis maintains that AAVE is the result of a Creole derived from English and various West African languages. It is believed that the Creole was created by West African languages and native English-speaking individuals during the era of slavery in the southern states by indentured servants. This contact led to a pidgin, which in return led into the creation of the Creole. This kind of thing seems to have taken place in the Caribbean, and may also have happened in some places, at some times in the United States. For instance, Gullah, or Sea Islands, Creole spoken in the coastal islands of South Carolina and Georgia seems to have formed in this way. Sidnell, page 1, Gullah is an AAVE variety spoken in South Carolina and Georgia. The critical age hypothesis states that children cannot fully acquire a language unless they are exposed to a language between birth and middle age. The theory that states that there is a window of time between early childhood and puberty for learning a first language, and beyond which first language acquisition is almost always incomplete. The dialect hypothesis, the belief that African slaves, upon arriving in the United States, picked up English very slowly and learned it incorrectly, and that these mistakes have been passed down through generations. It is theorized that the language comes from West Africa, and Britain, as the East Anglia dialect, has no third-person singular in the present tense. People argue against this theory, as the Creole was created in the southern United States and the white people discontinued using the dialect. The pidgin was used between whites, and slaves in the South developed into a language unique to the southern states. However, the white population's dialect changed, because when southern whites migrated north, they did not suffer racial discrimination, which southern black residents experienced in the South for decades. Deficit theory, the belief that certain ethnic groups are intellectually inferior to others. Descriptive grammar describes the way English is used by speakers and then analyzes it on the rules and the structure of the language. The error correction hypothesis, introduced in 1976 by Vigil and Ollier. It describes three forms of feedback, which are described as street lights, to help the learner to obtain fluency without having them raise the affective filter to block learning. By using this information, the instructor can use verbal and non-verbal communication to help relay the message if the learner doesn't understand the lesson. This is explained by the green light. If the learner can effectively show the instructor that he or she understands the lesson, the learner is able to move on to the next stage of learning. Depending on the severity or feedback given to the teacher, the learner may receive a yellow or red light, which the teacher must ask the learner to restate or reword what they understood. A red light would mean the learner needs to stop trying altogether, at which time the teacher will try and recycle the lesson plan to help the learner to be able to reach the next level. By doing this, the instructor helps to raise or lower the learner's affective filter. Krashen, on the other hand, states that there should be little to no error correction, and that errors should only be corrected if it affects the meaning of the lesson. Vigil and Oller state it's important in small stages to help the learner to become aware of their mistakes. The fossilization hypothesis, the explanation as to why some adults cannot master a second language despite having access to it. The fundamental difference hypothesis, the theory that states that L2 acquisition is different than L1 acquisition. Linguistic level. Physiological level. Acoustic level. Gardner's multiple intelligences. Linguistics, the spoken and written language. Linguistics, math, analyze problems. Musical composition, performance, appreciation of music. Bodily kinesics, whole body to solve problems. Spatial intelligence, use of patterns in wide space. Interpersonal, understand the intentions, motivations and desires of other people. Intrapersonal, to understand oneself, feelings, fears and motivations. Grimm's law, the description of a phonological change in the sound system of an early ancestor of the Germanic languages formulated by Jacob Grimm. Innateness hypothesis, the rise that children are born with a capacity to generate sentences. The theory that the human species is genetically equipped with a universal grammar, which provides the basic design for all human languages. Input hypothesis, how L2 learns a second language. It involves acquisition as the learner improves naturally. Interlanguage grammar, the type of language or linguistic system used by second and foreign language learners who are in the process of learning a target language. Interlanguage pragmatics, the study of the ways in which non-native speakers acquire, comprehend, and use speech acts in a second language. Interlanguage theory, language created by Larry Seelinker, an American professor of applied linguistics, in 1972. Focuses in on grammar and pragmatics. Language experience approach, an approach to teaching reading and language arts that uses words and stories from the student's own language and experience. Linguist theory challenge structural linguistics and introduces transformational grammar. Linguistic coding deficit hypothesis, LCDH, hypothesis created by Ganschow and Sparks, which states that difficulties with foreign language acquisition stem from deficiencies in one or more of the linguistic codes in the student's native language system. Nativism views language acquisition as innately determined. Theorists believe that human beings are born with a built-in device of some kind that predisposes them to acquire language. Maximum exposure hypothesis, learners need as much exposure as possible to the target language, because the greater the amount of input, the greater the gains in the new language. Monitor hypothesis explains and defines the relationship between acquisition and learning and defines the influence of the latter on the former. Monogenetic theory of language origin, the belief that all languages originated from a single language. The natural order hypothesis, grammar is learned through a natural order. It occurs mostly when young children are learning to speak. Neo-grammarian hypothesis, the claim that sound shifts, i.e., changes in phonological systems, take place without exceptions. OG2 concept of voluntary and involuntary minorities, theory on how minorities react to learning in another country. Central issues responsible for failure and mistrust. Need to build trust by enlisting parents. Groups history, learning English separates them. Explain the problem. Treat learner as an individual. Voluntary refugee, person who migrates to another country. Involuntary refugee, person who is forced to move. War and slaves. Optimality theory, the hypothesis that a universal set of ranked phonological constraints exists, where the higher the constraint is ranked, the more influence it exerts on the language. Example, in English, one constraint is the following: obstruent sequences may not differ with respect to their voice feature at the end of a word. Prescriptive grammar details the rules and structure of a language. Research directional hypothesis, assuming that by manipulating independent variables, there will be a change in the dependent variables. This would be by using L1 as an independent variable and L2 as a dependent variable. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the proposition that the structure of a language influences how its speakers perceive the world around them. It is often presented in its weak form, linguistic relativism, and its strong form, linguistic determinism. The hypothesis that states the language we use determines how we think about the world. Seelinker's interlanguage theory maintains the separateness of a second language learner's system and gives the system a structurally intermediate status between the native and target languages. ELL students produce their own self-contained linguistic system. The system is not a native language or target language system, rather it falls between the two. Stages of interlanguage development include random errors, pre-systematic, experimentation and inaccurate guessing, emergent growing inconsistency in linguistic production. Backsliding appears to have grasped, but later regressed and unable to correct errors. Systematic stage ability to correct errors on their own. Rules may not be well formed, but display more internal self-consistency. Stabilization, few errors are made, have mastered the system to the point of fluency. Intralingual inconsistencies within the target language. Global errors affect meaning. Local errors, close similarities in word form, i.e. spelling. Interlanguage continuum. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I hope to see you next time. Thank you again.